My name is Melissa Wright, and I am the chair of the Cherokee Garden Library Advisory Board for the Atlanta History Center. I'm delighted that you could all join us this evening. I wish to share a little background for those of you joining us for the first time. The Cherokee Garden Library was established by the Cherokee Garden Club of Atlanta in 1975 and is named for the Cherokee rose, which is the state floral emblem of Georgia. The library is one of the special collection libraries of the Keenan Research Center at the Atlanta History Center. The Cherokee Garden Library collects and preserves books, periodicals, manuscript collections, and visual arts collections ranging from 1586 to the present. These collections tell the diverse and fascinating stories of horticulture and botanical history in the southeastern United States and areas of influence throughout the world. The Cherokee Garden Library is deeply connected to the History Center's Gosweda Gardens, a remarkable 33-acre green space that contains 9 distinct ecologically beneficial and educational gardens. I invite you to learn more about these gems of the Atlanta History Center, whether you visited here dozens of times or if it's your first visit, as there are always new treasures to explore. This evening's program is presented as part of the Ashley Wright McIntyre Lecture Series. We are so grateful to the McIntyre family for establishing the Ashley Wright McIntyre Education and Programming Fund in memory of Ashley and her love of the natural world. Thank you also to our generous patrons this evening. You can find their names on the display board in the atrium. A gracious thanks to our event co-chairs, Adelaide Burton and Betsy Robinson, along with our floral designers, Kathy Hendricks and Laura Draper. I also extend my gratitude to each of you for attending this special talk tonight. Before I welcome our Cherokee Garden Library Director, Stacy Catron, to introduce our speaker, I would like to take a moment to congratulate Stacy on her recent award. She has been awarded the Garden Club of America 2023 National Medal for Historic Preservation. The awards are the Garden Club of America's highest honor for distinguished achievements relating to its purpose. Stacy is being recognized for her significant contributions as a garden preservationist and scholar, and we are so fortunate to have her at the helm of the library. And now I would like to welcome Stacy to introduce our speaker.
Thank you so much, Melissa. Good evening, Cherokee Garden Library friends. It's so good to see all of you. I didn't get to hug all of you before the lecture began, so after, okay? Pim's cups and more hugs. Before I introduce Fergus Garrett, I wish to share that Fergus has graciously agreed to take some questions from the audience after his talk. And so please raise your hand. We'll have house lights up after his talk, and I will bring the microphone to you. And now it's certainly my deep honor to introduce our speaker this evening. I first learned about renowned gardener and garden writer Christopher Lloyd and his celebrated garden at Great Dixter through the pages of Rosemary Vary's The Englishman's Garden. And Ryan Gainey, a dear friend of mine, gave me that book many years ago. Shortly thereafter, I began reading Lloyd's witty and knowledgeable garden writing, fell in love with it, through his many books, all of which are here, of course, at the Cherokee Garden Library, along with all of Fergus's books, too. Recently, I have been reading Mr. Lloyd's columns in old issues of Country Life magazine, which has really been fun. But now, to the star of the evening. Raised in the United Kingdom and Turkey, Fergus Garrett studied horticulture at Y College, graduating in 1989. And I think Mr. Lloyd went there too. Is that right, Fergus? Yes. He was appointed as head gardener of Great Dixter in 1992 by Mr. Lloyd, and they worked closely together until Mr. Lloyd's passing in 2006. And currently, Fergus Garrett is, of course, Chief Executive Officer and Head Gardener of Great Dixter Charitable Trust. And he continues to help this incredible garden evolve and be dynamic. And I know a lot of you already know that. So he has so many honors, it's beyond impressive, and we don't have enough time to read all of them tonight. But I would like to note a more recent honor, which is so impressive, which is the Royal Horticultural Society's Victoria Medal of Honor. I mean, can we say that again? The Royal Horticultural Society's Victoria Medal of Honor. Incredible. Incredible. So there's so many things about Fergus Garrett that I admire. One of the things, and I don't think I'll have time to talk about it tonight, is his mind maps. So I challenge you tomorrow, or maybe later tonight after you've had some more PIMS cups, to go check that out on YouTube. And it's just such a pleasure to have Fergus here, and I welcome him now. Thanks so much.
I love the peacocks. It's really well done. Well, it's my honor to be here, really, amongst you. I mean, I love coming here, and it's just not only seeing the wonderful flora and the countryside, but also meeting really incredible people. And this lecture wouldn't happen without you being here as well to be a part of it. I want to say a huge thank you to Raymond McIntyre and his family, and again, you know, it's because of them that I'm here, but also to Adelaide and Dalberton for welcoming a whole bunch of us to their home, their wonderful home, and that wonderful garden as well this afternoon. Also, thank you to Betsy and Lee Robinson, Melissa and Bobby Wright, and Kathy Hendricks, and Laura and Claire Draper, and also to Sarah Roberts, who I've known for a number of years, and of course to you, Stacey. Thank you for chasing me and making this happen as well. So I'm going to talk to you about Great Dixter, and I think quite a few of you will know that place. It's a quirky garden in the southeast of England. It's about 55 miles southeast of London. And it was the home of the late Christopher Lloyd, who was my great friend and mentor and close ally. And he was an incredible gardener and developed that place into this sort of very dynamic, well-known place that's got just such a strong sense of being and sense of place. So I'm going to show you lots of slides, and the reason I'm going to do that rather than just dwell over just one or two pictures is that because it's a very dynamic place. It's ever-changing and vibrant, and I think having a fast lecture like that gives you an account of that. But I'll start off with the history first. So look, there's Great Dixter House. It's in the village of Northiam. It's a 15th century manor house with a Lutyens wing with a 16th century yeoman's hall added onto it. And the Lloyd family only bought it in 1910, and they bought it for a ridiculous amount of money, something like £6,000. Well, I suppose in 1910 that was a lot of cash, and they wanted to make a country home for themselves. So the Lloyd family being Daisy and Nathaniel Lloyd, Christopher's parents. So they commissioned this great man, Sir Edwin Lutyens, to restore and renovate the house. And Lutyens was a sort of a leading figure in the arts and crafts movement. Very busy, but he did an incredible restoration of Dixter, but also laid out the gardens as well. So that was the original house that the Lloyds bought, and dating back to 1450, a timber-framed manor house, and typically divided into three sections: a central hall, which is, you know, near enough the size of this room, with 2 quarters either side of that. And it was in a pretty derelict state and down on one knee, and so they wanted to restore it. And what had happened also is that it had been partitioned and subdivided and into a series of rooms. And Nathaniel, who's a stickler for architecture, wanted it to be sort of made into that single communal living space. So Lutyens set to work on it, and he added this immense wing on the left-hand side that you see there, and the Yeoman's Hall, which was a derelict building that they found a few miles away, to make it into the building that it is now. And this is a view across what we call the Peacock Garden with Christopher Lloyd's mother, Daisy Lloyd, there. You can see, you know, after the building was complete, with that sort of extraordinary roofscape, with the oldest part of the house in this section here, that's the Lutyens' wing, and the yeoman's hall sits just behind all of that. And these are the topiary pieces that were planted by Christopher's father, not by Lutyens, but Christopher's father. And this is what it looks like now. Well, it looks like now, but this winter it looked a bit like that, actually. But you've had such a sort of worse winter than we've had. And I appreciate the cold that you've had and the damage that it's done. So it's an extraordinary building with an extraordinary garden wrapped around it. Most of the views are inward facing towards the house. It's compartmentalized into a series of rooms, so you move from one room to another, each of those rooms with a different feel and a different sort of set of plants, but also there's cohesion with all the self-sowers that are there. So it's only 6 acres in total. I suppose our zones would be zone 8-ish. We get about 30 to 35 inches of rain a year, so which is similar to what you get, but of course our summers are not hot like yours, so we don't have the intense heat. So it's pretty mild gardening conditions, pretty good gardening conditions, but restrictive to some of the plants that we can't grow. You know, we can't always grow zinnias and gomphrenias and those sort of things because they may not like our summers. They may not be hot enough. So we have our restrictions too. So there's the Yeoman's Hall, the derelict building that they found a few miles away near Sissinghurst, and they bought it for £75, which is, I suppose, about $110. And they had all the timbers numbered and added onto the back end of the house, and that became the master bedroom, and you can see it going up there, you know, and this is what it looked like once it was finished with Lutyens' wonderful concave and convex steps with taking in the slope. You can see the slope there, so he took it in with this lovely terrace and raised it up on this sort of brick plinth. And it was the master bedroom. It's a wonderful building, and that's what it looks like now, a view across the topiary lawn with the old cattle drinking tank there. So the old building of Dixter, the 15th century building, was in a small holding, a farm. So there were barns, a medieval barn, and oast houses where they grew dried hops, and there were various cow sheds and buildings, and Lutyens very cleverly incorporated those into the garden scene. So you'll see buildings like this dotted around the garden, and buildings like that you can see the old tile roofs on, but also structures like these old cattle drinking tanks that were there. So they're all been incorporated into the design of the garden, and the house sits right in the center of that garden. And it was a wonderful place for the Lloyds to bring up their family. Lutyens was there from 1910 to 1912, and then Christopher's father really took on the project. Lutyens was very, very busy. He was doing New Delhi, but he was also, you know, working on 60 other projects. So, and they wanted to have a family, and here are the children. Christopher's 4 brothers, as you can see here, his sister Letitia, and young Christopher Lloyd himself. And the father, Nathaniel, was keen on photography, so you'll see lots of photographs of the kids lined up like this, you know, and we've got tons and tons of photos of them just lined up, and they must have hated it really, and you know, as you can see there. And all sort of growing up. Christopher was always getting told off, he said, because he was always moving. You can see that he's slightly blurred in that image. But you can see it was an extraordinary place to have a family and to have a garden. Christopher's mother was very keen on gardening. And this is the stable unit here. There's the great medieval barn and the oast houses. These are the various sheds that were incorporated into the garden scene. And you can see what Lutyens did. He compartmentalized it. So you go in through this section. That's one compartment. You go into another compartment and another one and another one and another one. And then you move through all the various other compartments with semi-natural areas as well. So beautiful design, beautiful architecture, you know, typical of Lutyens with these Moorish archways, brick and tile, and sort of leading you and inviting you into the next space. And of course, decorated with all these plants in the true Christopher Lloyd style. And the place is full of colour, you know, full of vibrant colour. Maybe not as vibrant as the image is showing you there, but it's dripping with plants. And Christopher, just, you know, about 4 weeks before he died, he said to me, you know, Fergus, he said, the place is yours. You take it and do what you want with it. And he said, but don't ever forget that it's a place for plants and people who love plants. You know, and that's really sort of very important for me as well, that it's just has to be dripping with plants, and they come first. So they spill out onto the pathways, they invade your space. You know, it creates, you know, just in Adelaide's garden, it creates that intimacy that is so important in these places. And all of that, of course, is supported by the structure and the infrastructure, the concave and the convex steps, the brick walls, the yew hedges, and topiary pieces and so on, all add to the magic of the place. And those sort of structural elements, like the hedges, are visual barriers as well. You know, not only are they a backdrop to the plants that are there, but they're a visual barrier to stop your eyes, so that your eyes, the image is not diluted by borrowing images from other parts of the garden. So extraordinary yew hedges, they take about 60 days to cut for one person, 8 hours a day, and we do that in August, and it lasts right the way through until October, November, something like that, you know, depending on the weather that we've had. And of course, these topiary pieces, they transport you to another place, don't they? You know, you're standing in this garden, and of course, what we're not feeling in this room are the smells and the sounds of that place. It's just magic. There's such a sort of cacophony of bird noise and insect noise as well. It's a really lively place. And what you do is that there's an element of mystery as well, because when you're in one space, you don't see the other, so you have to walk through an archway like this and, you know, walk down those steps, and you've got the meadows that open up in front of you, and then you turn your head to the right, and you've got the long border and that great bastion of a house that sits beyond it, and that sort of misty sort of view. And so you walk along that path, you come to Lutyens' circular steps, which look like this, with Itea ilicifolia in the far distance there, with Erigeron carvinscianus, with various hypericums and so on, and various cactus and succulent planting on the steps. And that cactus and succulent planting changes from one year to another. It may be like that one year, it may be like that another year. This year it's going to be amaranthus and so on and so on. You know, and so we're just sort of playing with this, but all within the sort of boundaries of the infrastructure laid down by Lutyens. And then you go down these steps, down into another compartment, which is the exotic garden, or the old rose garden, or the tropical or subtropical garden. Call it what you want, but it's where we took the roses out and played around with bananas and things like that. So this is what it looks like now, because we protect everything over the winter, and then it just will end up being a space like this as the plants grow, and as the wrapping is removed, and all that sort of subtropical planting takes over. And this is a space where you have to really be tactile with the plants. You know, you have to brush through them, and it creates this sort of another experience within a garden, because you're swallowed up by the vegetation that's there. So Lutyens laid the garden down, but the garden has changed, the infrastructure has changed, and most of those infrastructural changes happened during Christopher's father's time, because Lutyens, as I said, was very busy and he was rather rushed, so he rushed certain areas and left certain areas floating. You know, the big lawn in the barn garden, well, that was then dug up during the war to grow vegetables, and then Christopher's father decided to turned that into a sunken octagonal pool, and there he is. He trained as he was a lithographic printer by trade, made a lot of money, and then he decided to actually retire and shoot and play golf down in the countryside. He favoured the Rye golf course, which is an immaculate, extraordinary place on the coast, and he practiced architecture, and you could do that in those days, you know, just say you're an architect and build buildings all around you, which he did. But he played around, and he was very gifted. He played around with that space that you saw there, and put in a design for a sunken octagonal pool with York stone paving right the way around, with recessed seats into the grass banks, and that's what it turned out like. And it's a wonderful design. And then it got softened and softened and softened over years of planting by Daisy Lloyd, and this is what it looks like now. Just absolutely magic, with lichen on the pavement and the steps, and with lots of plants coming out of the old lime mortar, which has crumbled in the walls, with vegetation right the way through it. So it's an intimate, very sort of magical space, that, and rich with life as well. When we did our biodiversity audit of the whole estate, you know, with all the ancient woodlands and meadows and whatever, this was the richest part of the whole estate, with extraordinary stuff in there. And that sort of informality was very much led by Daisy Lloyd. And those of you who knew Christopher Lloyd will see a real sort of resemblance. Mother and son look very much like each other. And Daisy was the driving force behind the garden. She was a sort of semi-naturalistic style of gardener, favoured William Robinson's style. And so she really championed the meadows. And unfortunately, Christopher's father died in 1933, and so Daisy took over the whole estate. And so that allowed the place to be loosened up, because I remember Christopher telling me that when his mother and him were walking around the garden, they found a self-sown plant. They'd say, well, let's hide that from Daddy and the gardeners, because Daddy and the gardeners like the formality. So she developed these meadows to become informal like this. And then the place has got magic, you know. It's got this sort of, this tidal wave of plants that come. You see, so this is a dry stone wall that leads from the kitchen to the main road, or the country track, and you've got this is a shot of Euphorbia robiae with primroses in Albrecia, and within 5 weeks that same wall does that as it changes. You know, just absolutely magical sort of change, and with the life that goes around that as well. So she loved the fact that plants would do their own things. So and that style continues with us now. You know, roses that sort of swallow up buildings, and walls that are just absolutely sort of full of vegetation. And of course, they have to be cleaned up once a year, and they look like this. You see, so that wall will be cleaned up. Lutyens' circular steps will be cleaned up, but then it will turn into that. You know, and when you go up onto the when you go up onto the terrace, you'll see Mexican daisies making use of every single crack there is in the brickwork. And then you go onto the terrace, brushing past the red valerian and the wisteria, and the terrace looks like this. And for some of you, you may think, well, gosh, that's a mess. And I fully appreciate that you could divide the audience in half, and half of you would want a much more sort of a tidy terrace. But this is what Christo liked, and this is what I love as well. He used to put his chair and seat there, and he would drink his champagne with his guests, or whiskey, depending on what time of day it was, and he'd inspect the insects coming onto the various bits of vegetation, and that vegetation would change. That same area within a few weeks does that, with the oxeye daisies gone, but then the angel's fishing rods and the evening primroses and those sort of things, and the campanulas taking over. So very, very dynamic, and that sort of dynamic element it sort of goes on to the garden. It sort of continues into the garden. It's there with all the self-sowers that are there, that are just sort of absolutely rich with plants that are just rubbing shoulders with the formal structure. And you can see from that aerial photograph, you can see the formality of the hedges and the topiary pieces, but look at the informality of those wild plants that are amongst all the ornamental plants that are there. So it's just beautifully, beautifully softened that whole space. And even in the most sort of complex areas of those nursery stock beds, that softening happens with self-sowers. And all of that was championed by Christo, but actually the origins of it came from Daisy Lloyd, that sort of informality of self-sowers. So you can see a stock bed here, and there is the same stock bed just a few weeks later with the plants that come up and take over. So it's exactly the same place. Well, from that, it goes on to that. So a very dynamic garden, as you can see. And Daisy also really loved the meadows as well. And they're the first things that you see when you come into the garden. And for some people, it's a real turn-off. And in the 80s and 90s, there used to be lots of complaint letters about the long grass. But now people are just in favor of it because of, you know, they're aware of the sort of loss of biodiversity and so on. And 98% of this habitat in Britain has disappeared since the Second World War, so it becomes a very precious habitat. And it's lovely to have that long grass kiss your ankles as you go, you know, as you walk to the front door. And that long grass adds another dimension to the garden because we've got water, we've got an exotic garden, we've got cacti and succulents, we've got pots, and we've got highly organized, colorful borders. And it's nice to have this dynamic bit of grassland, which is absolutely charming. I mean, you can have the finest lawn in the world and the finest trees in the world, you wouldn't get half the feeling that you get from a picture like that of just buttercups and red clover just brushing your legs as you walk down from the long border to the nursery. So it absolutely creates a sort of its own charm. And it's a very interesting juxtaposition with the formal structures within the garden. You know, the topiary lawn, the amount of complaint letters we've had about allowing the lawn to grow on the topiary lawn has been extraordinary, really, because people have been writing to us saying, topiary is meant to be for short grass. And you say, well, who said topiary is meant to be for short grass? And this has just been a sort of magic sort of transformation. And it connects us to the countryside as well. Your eyes just flow to the countryside beyond. And you've got that sort of great, extraordinary bastion of a house with all those sort of colourful borders. And then you've got the long grass that comes up to it. But there is a sort of division. That it doesn't just go right up to the border. There is a path there and a mown strip, so you've got breathing space as well. But it's that countryside coming into the place, which is a very important part of its character. And the meadows have got an incredibly long season. You know, that season starts with crocuses, as you can see there, and it goes on to sort of, that's the Crocus speciosus thomasinianus biflorus hybrids and the Chrysanthus hybrids. And then it goes to Crocus vernus hybrids with Narcissus pseudo-Narcissus. And then somewhere else in the garden where the conditions are slightly different, the meadow areas have got European dog's tooth violets, Erythronium dens canis, with Narcissus minor and primroses. And then from there, if you go to the main orchard, the daffodils are flowering. And then you go to the semi-shade of under the trees, and this sort of complex vegetation is there, the wood anemones and the primroses and the buttercups. And from here, you just go 30 yards north to a south-facing slope, and you've got snake's-head fritillaries coming out of Ranunculus ficaria. So this, again, like the borders, the meadows are extremely, extremely dynamic, and that place changes, you know, from one week to another. It's just got that sort of really intense energy about it. It's not a static garden at all. And then the orchids start coming. This is Orchis mascula, the early purple orchid. It's followed by Orchis morio, which is so rare in the British countryside now. And we've got thousands and thousands. They even seed themselves into pot plants in the nursery and so on. So, you know, we've just got them dripping out of every little space. And then comes the common spotted orchid, Dactylorhiza fuchsii, which is the latest of our orchids to flower. And you can see the topiary lawn there. And this is an image that I took on my phone so you can see how wild that place becomes as it gets swallowed up by all that vegetation that's part of it. And, you know, it's really quite interesting because this was a turn-off for some people many, many years ago, but now people just absolutely have fallen in love with it, especially as, you know, as the biodiversity audit has shown that this little garden is ranked 25th on that list of most biodiverse places in the United Kingdom. And so it sits amongst all those nature reserves that are 2,000, 3,000 acres big. This is only 6 acres in total. It's only been studied for a year. So our ecologists who studied it said in their 30 years of studying, this is the most biodiverse place they've seen. You know, and that's because not only because of the meadows that are in it, but it's because of that long season of vegetation. So it's a very, very special place. And of course, after the orchids, the grass grows brown, and we have to cut it. You know, that's the part of the system. So we cut it and we rake it up by hand into little piles, and we make these extraordinary compost heaps and grow our pumpkins and gourds on them. And those pumpkins and gourds are then collected. And you know, when Christo died, I didn't want that house to sit cold, so we filled every room with students and guests and so on, but the only room I protected was Christo's bedroom, but also his bathroom. And then I went into his bathroom a few times and I thought, oh, it's just a bit cold, it's a bit lifeless in here. You know, his shoes are in there, his shampoo's in there and so on, still smells of him. So I decided when we collected all the pumpkins and gourds that we put it into his bathroom. And I didn't take the photograph looking into his bath because they're in his bath as well, you know, and with the shoes there. And then from there, once they're ripe, we put them all around the house. But, you know, and he would have loved that. So, and that's you know, a byproduct of the meadows. But those meadows are, as you can see, I mean, this isn't a lecture on meadows, but you can see they're an incredibly diverse bit of land, very, very special. And what we've been doing over the last few years is we've been donating the hay, and with the hay comes the seeds to loads of local places. And I think in the last 10 years, we must have created about 400 meadows with using Dixter hay in the locality. You know, so. So Daisy loved the wilderness, you know, but she also loved the garden. She was a sort of really hands-on gardener, and she was the head gardener, if you like, and had a sort of 7, 8 gardeners that were behind her. And there she is in front of the long border. And that long border changed, and Christopher was very pleased to tell me that there wasn't one single plant in the long border that was there in the original plan. It all changed, and he said that's what gardens should do. You know, so it changed. This is after Daisy had died, and this is in 1979, and you big blocks of perennials, as you can see, and this is when I first saw it in 1984. Those big blocks of perennials had been divided into smaller groups, and then this is in my time. The border looks like this, and it has a long season. It starts really with snowdrops in February, goes on to February, March, April, May, June, July, August, September, right into October and November, and that's a picture in October of that border still. And then it goes brown because we don't live in the tropics, and so winter comes, and so we have it with all the sort of brown skeletons, which in themselves are rather beautiful. So it's an amazing place, long season of interest, and it was a place, it was the training ground for Christopher. He gardened alongside his mother, and he was keen on gardens from an early age. He was a very competent field botanist as a youngster. And here's a letter that was written in 1927 by Christo. He was 6 years old, and he says, "Dear Mr. Gauntlet, you're a kind man to give me a bush of Viburnum carlesii, all for my own. I'm sending you a photograph of the house where I live and the garden where my bush will live when it comes. I have put my 2 half-crowns back in my money box, and I will give Granny hers when she comes. Love and thank you very much, from Christopher Lloyd." And there he is with his Viburnum carlesii, and as he grew, the bush grew along with him, and that bush is still there, but he is no longer with us, of course. And all our propagation comes from this one plant, so we're keeping that special plant growing. But he was very hands-on, Christo. Christo studied modern languages at Cambridge, and that was interrupted by the war. And then he went off and did his military service, came back and went to Wright College to study horticulture, and then set up Great Dixter nurseries and used the garden as a notebook to write from. But then he went back to Wright to teach for a while. And he taught my tutor, Tom Wright, who then introduced me to Christo, and there's a sort of very lovely connection between us all. And so there he is in the potting shed, and he wrote from experience, from practical experience, and he had, of course, an extraordinary command of the English language as well. So that made the perfect sort of combination. And this is what he looked like when I first met him. You know, muddy trousers, always wearing gloves, and with his trug, you know, ripped shoes, always out in the garden, you know, just having fun with that place. And he was, you know, known as the colour clash man who loved bright colours and shocking people. But actually, he was very sensitive to the sense of place, you know, to what Dixter was. Dixter is a country garden. So he allowed the long grass to come into that place. He allowed the trees to grow as a jumble and then sweep down and touch the long grass underneath it. You know, he didn't want too garish a tree in these meadow areas because he didn't want them too gardeny. He wanted the wild thorns and pears and medlars and those sort of things. And so he was very sensitive to it. And he was very sensitive to that sort of self-sowing nature, like I mentioned before. So you see Dixter looking like this very often, you know, with things that are just, you seem that they look as though they're out of control, but they're all sort of carefully managed. It's having that sort of very natural look. And look at that seat in the barn garden. Look at, you know, when you sit down on that seat, you're sharing it with oxeye daisies and columbines and lady's mantle and valerians and lychnis and so on, and all of those sort of things. That sort of informality runs through our blood, and it's very, very important to the place. Here's the back drive. Look at it, and then it changes to that as the vegetation comes up. And then it takes on another layer and another layer. And all of those sort of seasons are a food crop for all those insects that need it. You know, as my wife says, they need somewhere to feed, somewhere to breed, and somewhere to sleep. And Dixter provides all of those things. And Christopher actually was... you know, he was an extraordinarily brilliant man, but he knew what his limitations were. He never, ever regarded himself as a designer. Although he had a very good spatial awareness, he just couldn't sort of bring himself to deal with steps and walls and those sort of things and all of that. So he didn't make many structural changes to the garden. This is the only structural change he made to the garden, where he paved over a grassy area and put down a pebble mosaic of his 2 dachshunds lying on their back. And that made it a much better space to have, because the plants can spill out onto the edges, but also allowed us to have pot displays on it. You know, those pot displays where we experiment with all sorts of things, from different tulips to different daffodils and so this is a pot display in April, this is one in May, you know, different plants all together, and here's another one in June, and look, that's September, and then there's one in October there as well. So they change on a regular basis, where we're just playing around with different things and trying to work out different compositions. Sometimes I do one, and that's predominantly green, to show the students that foliage is more important than flowers in many ways. So here's a green one that I did, showing these sort of negative spaces are important. And this is just using, and I wasn't using foliage plants for this, I was just using the plants that were set aside for flowers. So there's no ferns in here, no hostas, none of that. It's just making the sort of complexities of fine foliage and trying to do something with it. And of course, you let it flower and it does that. But I prefer it like that than that. But it was about sort of, so they became a very important teaching ground. And that sort of, that pot display, those pot displays spill out onto the front, either side of the porch. So when you enter the porchway, you're full of sort of lilies and those sort of things. And then, look, they change to dahlias within just a few weeks, and cannas and so on. So we're constantly growing for these. And so there's a real sort of array of pots that change from one season to another, from one year to another. Nothing is repeated, really. It's all one trial and experimental ground. And these are the sort of combinations that come out of those displays, and then we put those combinations into the garden, trying new sowing techniques, new propagation techniques, new colors, and new plants all the time. So you can see it's a very vibrant garden, and Christo loved this style of gardening because it fed his writing. You know, it fueled his writing, and his writing fueled his gardening. So it's this very dynamic place. And if you think that you've got all of this going on, you can understand why you get all of that as well. You know, we've got over half the UK species count of bees. We've got 16 of the 22 species of bumblebee, for instance. We've got 147 species of solitary bee out of the 220 that is meant to be. We've got a third of the spider species. We've got, you know, so it goes on. We've got over 2/3 of the butterfly species there. Of course, we're in the south of England, so that matters, but it's not only alive with gardeners and colour and vibrancy, it's alive with all the biodiversity, and we've taken this message and gone on to sort of spread it throughout sort of towns and cities. So Christo made one structural change, the terrace with the mosaic, but then he made changes like the topiary lawn became a meadow, the rose garden was turned into a tropical garden like this, which, you know, was full of bananas and dahlias and those sort of things. And so we took that, and after he died, I thought, we've done enough of the color thing, so let's turn it into that. So I turned it into that. And then after that, I thought, well, actually, I've got too many grasses in there. Let me just do something else. So we've just been playing around with it. So it's gone from this to that, and then from that to that, where you've got conifers and begonias and those sort of things in there. And when you look up at the sky, you see that. So it becomes this very immersive bit of garden. And every year it's different. Every year we sort of move things around. We grow all our own stuff. We hardly buy anything with that. And it just becomes this sort of very beautiful jungle. And so that's as a result of Christo turning it from a rose garden into a tropical garden. And you can see here, you know, the sort of range of, this is all from 1 year of planting in that garden, the range of things we grow in there. And so it's very, very exciting. It's very rich. It's only a small space, but very rich garden. So change is very important for us. Change that's forced by us, but also change that comes naturally. Because if you look at this section of the garden, this is a stock bed, nursery stock bed, and as certain things finish, that same area, this is taken in July, that same area is that in October. You see how the vegetation changes there. So it's very, very dynamic. And some of that is through, you know, us putting cannas in, 1, 2, 3, that's where the plantings happen. But others is as a result of one plant taken over from another. You know, so look, snowdrops are in that section of the border. Look, that's the same area later on as it changes. You know, if you look at that, snowdrops and crocuses. Amongst Prunus tenella, you can see the stems of the Prunus tenella. When the crocuses and the snowdrops finish, there we have the Prunus tenella flowers. And when the Prunus tenella finishes flowering, look at the cornflowers that are there. That's the same space later on. And that's been the same for 30-odd years like this. So, and that mimics what goes on in the wild, what goes on in the woodlands, what goes on in the grassland. There's nothing unnatural about this. We're not moving plants in and out, but there's sort of this succession or layered planting, which is really quite important to us. And that's what he was sort of a master of, you know. And you can see from this picture also that he was a master of colour. You can see what he was wearing, and you can see there is his ties. I'm sure some of you got ties like that in the wardrobe. And there are his shirts, and there's his border, and there's his shirts. You know, so you know he wore the colours that he loved, but he also gardened with the colours that he loved. And so he was very sort of good about you know, just putting stuff together. And this was all the way through that period where people were writing about the colour wheel and pastel shades, etc., all of that. And so he rebelled against that. Now, I've got nothing wrong with somebody creating a white garden. I think they're rather beautiful, but you know, I'd like strong colours. So I don't want anybody to say to me, don't use strong colours because it doesn't look good in the garden. I think people should be free in a garden to do what they want, and colour is very subjective as well. So, but he rebelled against that, and pink and yellow was a thing that he really sort of loved. And Rosemary Veary said, no, it doesn't work on the colour wheel, Christo, how can you do it? It just isn't natural, and so on. So we did lots of pink and yellow combinations just to rub her up the wrong way. And she was a great friend, but so we did pink and yellow combinations and send them to Rosemary, photographs to Rosemary. She never ever wrote back, and in the end we sent her photographs of Christo with a pink shirt standing in front of the yellow bush, and then whenever he put a yellow shirt on, we'd make sure we find something pink, and then we'd send it to Rosemary. But you know, but this just, you know, this is the other thing. Look, he's got a smile on his face, and that was the other thing about Dixter, our style of gardening, that you don't take yourself seriously. Of course, you try and, I mean, we garden that garden as efficiently and as high energy and as effectively as we can, but actually we have a lot of fun in there as well. So that, because that's what everybody should do in their garden. And so and if you look, that's a Christopher Lloyd combination of the pink cow parsley with the allium purple sensation, you know, and that's one of my combinations of magenta lychnis with ladybird poppies. But that's one of my combinations as well, you know, of Tulipa hatsazakura with forget-me-nots. And that's one of my combinations as well, you see. So it's just, who's to say what's right and wrong, you know, and all of this. And that's the high garden at Dixter last April. With Tulipa ballerina. It should be more orange than that in the photograph, but you can see it dancing through high density, low density, through permanent planting. The only bedding area there is there. Other than that, this is all amongst permanent planting. Some of those tulips sort of 3-4 years old within there as well. So you can see the intensity of colour that there is there. And this sort of playing around with plants. And again, don't get me wrong, I would say 3/4 of Dixter is not changed on a regular basis. Some of the planting has been the same for 30-odd years that I've known it. Some of the planting changes just a little bit here and there, once every 5 years or 6 years, but still it's got all those layers that come up through it. But then there's other parts of Dixter, I would say about 1/4 to 1/5 of it, where we just play with plants, like the exotic garden, we're playing with it, like these bedding areas. This is the solar garden in front of that. We're playing with it constantly and changing things and trying new things all the time. The solar garden is where we do most of our bedding, our seasonal displays. And I've done that for 30 years, changing them 2 or 3 times a year, because in Britain you can change them 3 times a year, and we've never ever repeated anything in there. You know, never ever repeated a combination in there. We've grown everything ourselves. I don't think we've bought any plants to put in there at all. Everything's been raised by ourselves. So it's about teaching these gardeners that come from everywhere, from Japan, you know, the USA. We have regular gardeners from the USA, from Canada, from Turkey, from Iran and Iraq, and we have them from Australia, New Zealand, the whole place, teaching them how to sort of like keep hold of these old skills to think for themselves so that they can do these sort of displays. So look, this is a display of Amaranthus with Ceteria. There's Amaranthus, there's Ceteria, there's Tagetes Simba with Rudbeckia triloba, which is one of your natives with Cornus alba elegantissima. That's one summer's display. The next summer's display was this, and I got a complaint. This is after Christo died, and I got a complaint letter over this because somebody said you're using too pastel shade of color. And I thought, well, you can't ever get it right, so you may as well just please yourself. So this is Cosmos Sonata with Adriatum Blue Horizon with Cana Mystique. There's a lime green zinnia in there. And so that was another year. And then another year, we did that, and that flowered for 4 months with Erigeron annuus, the white Erigeron annuus, with the bog sage Salvia uliginosa, with Tagetes patula, with Dahlia and Breckenfelder and all of those things. And it was just so loose and meadowy, and it was so sort of, it changed, you know, it was predominantly blue, then it went to blue, white, and orange, then the orange took over, and it just did wonderful things. And I thought, well, actually, it's too loose for me after a while. I want to do something slightly more static, so I grew antherinums, 2 different types of antherinum, one bronze one, one red one, and blended it like waves and did that. You know, you can't see the colors there, but just did that through it. And then I sowed the antherinums in July and put tulips amongst them. So the tulips flowered first, and then the antherinums took over. And then I thought to myself, what happens if I put pink through there? And what happens if I sowed the antherinums in September and overwintered them under glass and put them out? You know, they're all questions. And I could easily go back and repeat that year after year after year, but where's the joy in that? You know, so what I did is I grew that combination first, and this was to plug the gap in the spring. And as soon as these came out, because Hatsasakura flowers quite early, and so did the Myosotis, I put in the pink, the burgundy, and the red, and the orange antherinums in, using a different seed strain, which is the Liberty series, which isn't as good as the other one, because look, there's a tidal wave of green here, because it doesn't branch from lower down flowers, so that was a Achilles heel as far as that plant was concerned. And then we swept that away and did that combination with it, which was this sort of mixture of Salvia indigo spires with Hillcrest candy dahlias, with Erigeron annuus, and so on. And that in itself was all right. But actually, look, you know, if you analyze this, and this is what we do, the students, it could do with a bit of muscle there, couldn't it? And with that, some of that coming down into there. So it wasn't absolutely perfect. So we score these out of 10 every single time we do that. We analyze it, how we could do it better, look at the timings and so on. So it's about thinking this whole process out. Whereas if you're buying plants in, you can't do that, can you? You can't manipulate plants in the same way. So the following year did that, just a very simple display of daydream tulips amongst forget-me-nots, and then thought to myself, what happens if I grew Rudolphia, Tanacetum niveum, Cynoglossum, so on and so on, Silene armeria. The Cynoglossums had to be sown in September, the Silene armeria had to be sown in September, the Rudolphia had to be sown in February, so we just did all of that, and then that was the combination. You know, never grown those plants together, but just, again, being creative with those plants. And then they were swept out of the way, and the zinnias that were sown on the 25th of June followed, and they flowered until November. And then the following year, it makes you tired, doesn't it, all this stuff? And the following year, with purple prince tulips amongst foxgloves. All the foxgloves were grown from seeds, so we grew about 200 foxgloves from seed. The purple prince flowered first, the foxgloves finished, followed them afterwards, and then that was the finishing combination that was in the summer, again grown by us, you know. And then, you know, I've done 30 years of this, so I'm going to show you at least 10 years of it. And blue amable tulips with forget-me-nots, with Smyrnium perfoliatum. You may not think much of that, but that's Smyrnium foliatum. We're the only people in the world that's used that for bedding out, because it's a self-sower. and a pest, you know. So we dug up bulbils and placed them out and came up with which size we could use them. Because the idea behind all of this is that we're not doing textbook stuff. We're bringing new stuff to horticulture all the time, you know, new sowing dates, new manipulation, new plants, you know, new combinations all the time, so that we're adding something to all of that literature that's out there. So that was the first display. Then we did that with Clarkias and with Silene Blue Angel and Tanacetum niveum with Buplorums and so on. Lovely sunset. I took that on the phone as well. And then we swept that away and did that combination afterwards, and I think that's the end of those combinations. But you get the picture how sort of dynamic that place is. And Christo hasn't seen all of this, the sort of how we've stepped it up since his time. But he would be absolutely happy, you know, looking down on us, seeing this, because this is the sort of thing that he used to love, feeding the horticultural world with information like this, combinations and different plants and so on and so on. So that place, which was always a vibrant thinking place, has remained a vibrant thinking place after losing the great man that was behind it. And it's about being inquisitive. It's about putting Merlot tulips, which will open up Burgundy amongst a rose campion, and saying to yourself, well, that's going to be a wonderful combination. The grey leaf of the campion and the burgundy wine-coloured tulip. But actually, if we stuff Orlea grandiflora, I don't know how many of you have grown Orlea grandiflora, it's a little white-flowered carrot in amongst this, not easy to grow in our conditions. If we put Orlea grandiflora, what will happen? So the tulip flowers, there it is, the flowering amongst the Lychnis. Ignore the Queen Anne's lace that's there. And once the tulip finishes, we deadhead it. So you've got just the grey leaves of the Lychnis, the rose campion, waiting for it to flower. So this is what happens. The Orlea grandiflora starts growing amongst it. And, you know, so you've got this lovely sort of informal effect amongst the Lychnis, and then the Lychnis comes up and flowers through the Orlea grandiflora. And then you could add lime green to that. You can have a pink Lychnis rather than a magenta one. You could add blue Silene. You know, you could take that combination in all sorts of directions. And it was fantastic, this, and until somebody fell into it. And then we had to sweep it away. So we had this sort of print of a person in there. But I mean, but that happens in a garden. So we're not about this. Although I was a parks person. I worked at Brighton Parks in the early 80s, and I love this sort of planting. It's not Dixter. In the same way, that isn't Dixter. If we take a plant, we want to make music with it. We want to put it into combination. We want to do that with it, you know. And that's sort of that gap there. That sort of. Who's the French actress? Beatrice Dalle. Yeah, that sort of Beatrice Dalle gap is very, very important there, so that you haven't just got a collar of Sanguisorba around that dahlia. And that's what Christo would do. He'd take something like Colocasia Black Magic, and rather than growing it on its own like that, he'd grow it on its own just to get used to it. And then he'd think, well, actually, I'm going to put variegated reed grass with it, and I'm going to put Plectranthus with it. I'm going to do that with it so that it has movement and connection and all of those things, which is what Dixter is about. And so, I mean, that's one of my combinations after Christo died, and that's one of my combinations as well. So that sort of same creativity carries on with a whole team of us doing it. And here, the simple combination was the yellow Aquilegia chrysantha with the catmint. And then I thought, well, if I sink in this sort of shortish allium, round and purple it's called, amongst it, that will add another dimension to it. And just did it, and that's what it turned out, and it gave it real depth. You know, in the same way that hollyhock facing you gives you real depth amongst the verbascum and the red auroch. So Dixter is full of those sort of things. Wherever you turn a corner or do anything, it's just got that sort of magic of plants and that creativity, which is part of our style of gardening. Sometimes it's wild like this. Sometimes it's slightly more subdued like that. But it's from one year to another, it's different. And this is what Dan Pearson wrote, you know, who's a great garden designer. And he said the great thing about Dixter is that every time you go there, it's the same place. It's a familiar place. But every time you go there, it's different too. You know, and that's what gardens should do, because they're living things. And the great thing about Christo is that he used to write about it on a weekly basis. We don't do that, I'm sorry to say, but we lecture about it, and we teach it, and we talk to people about it. We do lots of sort of lectures on the internet and so on. And I do write occasionally, and other members of the team write as well. But we should really write a lot of this stuff down, because it's all sort of interesting new stuff. So it's a magic place when you come out of that house. And it's something that's, you know, we don't always speak of in gardens, and that's the spirit a place has. And Dixter has its own spirit, which is very important. And you come out of that door, and you front door, and you look one side, and it's green and calm, and the vegetation hasn't changed for the 30 years that I've known it. And then you look the other side, and it's this dynamic, sort of ever-changing, 3 times a year border that's just creative, and sometimes it doesn't work, sometimes it works, sometimes it's brilliant, you know, and all grown from us. So it's got that energy. It's in the fast lane. And from there you go into the barn garden. You see a scene like this in October, and then you come out of the barn garden, you go into the wall garden. You've got the pot displays like this. This is an October pot display that I did there. And then from there, you go into the tropical garden, you see combinations like this, and you go in another year, it may be different altogether. I mean, there's nothing extraordinary about this sort of thing. It's just using good plants effectively. And then you walk along the long border, and that's just got sort of such a depth of planting within it, and such a long season, and again, changes throughout the seasons, and from one year to another, to the sort of the peace of the horse pond area, the semi-natural pond where the heavy horses used to drink. And this was Christo's favourite part of the garden, where he used to just put out his rug and coffee and just sit there and just watch the kingfishers come onto the water and so on, and until the garden got too busy and he could no longer sit there, because his dogs would go ballistic over, you know, visitors coming anywhere near him. So, but it's a lovely, quiet space, and the garden is great in the spring and the summer. It's great in the autumn. I think November is one of the best times to see that place. It's just sort of full of autumn colour, and it's where spring clashes with autumn. And I love it in the winter as well, because we shut for the winter. We don't have any visitors. We work right the way through it. We're on our waterproofs. We work through all those rainy days off planks as well. And it's about teaching that next generation to work in adverse weather conditions as well. So there aren't sort of many days where you're sort of hiding in glass houses or anything like that. And I think the place is special because of people, and I think that's another thing. People make gardens, isn't it? Places. Some of the best gardens that the ones that I love most, have been belonging to people who've had no formal training. They're just creative or love plants. They don't sometimes worry about design at all. They just grow interesting plants. I've got a friend who grows 2,000 conifers, dwarf conifers. They just look like 4-inch sticks to me, but I love it because he loves it. You know, so it's about people. I think it's really, and this man meant so much to me, and lots of people said to me, isn't it difficult taking over, you know, or trying to fill Christo's shoes? And I thought, well, I'll never be able to fill his shoes. I mean, he's special. But I never ever think that he's looking over my shoulder. I think he's by my side in the same way that I was always by his side. And that's where that special relationship goes. And now I work with a team, and we're all by each other's sides. And that's really lovely feeling as well. And we know that we've got, you know, a very important job to do. It's not just about having fun. We've got that house to look after. We've got the contents of the house and all that social history to look after. That's why we've got a curator and archivist as well, looking at all the Lloyd collections. And because the Lloyds never threw anything away, so if you open up a cupboard, you know, that's the medicine cupboard. And I remember whenever I was ill, Christo used to go and grab some sort of horse tablet-like thing there and say, "Take this," and it never made you feel better, you know. And I like it because when you open this cupboard, this is in the kitchen yard. There's pickled fruit from the 1930s still there, and it's wonderful, isn't it? Because then you pick up Gertrude Jekyll's Wood and Garden book, and there's a letter from Gertrude Jekyll in there, you know, talking to Daisy Lloyd, and then you find letters like this, and it says, "Dear Mrs. Lloyd, I hope you'll accept this formal apology for the following misdemeanors of my wife. 1, impertinence to the host and hostess. 2, lateness for meals. 3, smoking. 4 looking for silver hallmarks and generally criticizing the furniture. 5 card playing. 6 insufficient suitable clothing, especially strong shoes. 7 calling other guests by inappropriate names. What I like is that it says, I'm exceedingly sorry, but I'm helpless in the matter. and it's apology number 3112, 312. So, so they're just floating throughout the place. But it's important that that place isn't a museum, that the fires are kept burning bright in there. And that's why we fill it with all these students that come. This is Ben from North Carolina, and you've got, Lewis, Rachel, you've got Yuko from Japan, and so on, from Germany, from Britain, France, Portugal, from all over the world. The number of students we've had are incredible. And we're known in the trade as being the #1 training place for flower gardeners. And we've got, very often we have 3-4 year waiting lists to go on. So it's just a very special place like that. And you teach them to come up with combinations like this, to be able to do combinations like this. You teach them to look after the infrastructure of the place. The bones of it, which are so important, and to sort of create to merge that with the informality and the countryside coming in to give it the softness that it needs. And so this is again a photograph that I took just on my phone one early morning this year, and how to grow Campagna pyramidalis 6-7 feet, 6-7 feet tall from a single sowing in April. And to train figs like that, and to understand all those sort of mind maps. And this is a seed sowing mind map. This came from there's a wonderful gardener at Chanticleer Gardens called Matt Burgesser, and he came as a student to Dixter. He was with us for 3 years. He was a really special guy. And Matt said to me, why don't we simplify our seed sowing? Why are you sowing seeds at all different times of the year and so on? And I said, well, actually, partly because we're trying to manipulate the workload, push and pull work, because if you sow a lot of seed in the spring, you've got to prick it out. Whereas if you do autumn sowing, 70-80% of your seeds that could be sown in the spring, you can autumn sow. They sit there. They need very little watering, but they're ready to plant in March, which means that you only got 20-30% to sow in February. So it takes that workload and it's like doing a complex meal. You do all the prep work beforehand. So, and then I said, and also you want to try and manipulate combinations. So I said, get me a piece of paper and I'll make a list of the seeds. So I made a list, and then I put the dates of sowing, and then I did these combinations like this, like that. And then I started adding different dates for a different combination, the red lines and combinations. And about halfway through, he said to me, I get the picture now, don't worry, because it's good. But then we kept the drawing that I did for him, you see, and there it is, I've taken a photograph of it. So you're trying to teach people at this sort of, and each one of those little things has probably 15 drawings like that attached to it. It's just very, very complex, that teaching that we do there. So it's about teaching them at the highest level, and it's about them understanding, what goes on in nature can be mimicked in a garden, from the crocuses to the snake's head fritillaries in the same place to the orchids that follow. That can be mimicked in a shrubby woodland setting style, or in a perennial border or a mixed border, that same plants living together and sharing the same space. So and creating these sealed units that are very useful for public realm planting as well. And it's also about making them aware of that life and biodiversity that exists in the garden. Once setting these moth traps and seeing, these students are discovering fungi. There's a French girl that discovered this little fungus that was growing on a bit of wood, and it was the only one recorded in East and West Sussex ever. And it was only the 33rd recording of that since it was discovered in 1736 or something. And now she's this sort of biodiversity freak, this girl. And she is going to be one of the leaders of our industry. We're in a green industry that sometimes isn't very green. So actually to plant that seed in amongst the new generation is so terribly, terribly important. And so Dixter does that. And also planting the seed in these youngsters as well. They're looking at a little spider that's carrying its young on its back. And that so that education program at Dixter does that. And with all of those things that you do, you take these sort of very, very positive steps forward, don't you? And recognizing the sense of place and the history and the energy within that garden, and not keeping it as a museum piece set in aspic, but actually making sure it's dynamic and innovative, but it still is the garden that it always was. Then you take those very positive steps forward, but you never ever forget the past either. Thank you very much. Thank you.
So if we could have the house lights come up, please. Okay, everyone get prepared. It's going to be a lot. Okay, I'm going to see if we can just take 3 questions because I want us to all go celebrate together. So I'm going to leave Fergus up here, and I'm going to come down and raise your hand if you have a dynamic, interesting question.
It can be a boring one as well. They're usually quite interesting as well. Yes, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I think you are, yeah.
Fergus, first of all, thank you. Thank you very much. And my question is twofold. With Christopher as a mentor and taking on the mantle of such an important property, an important garden, and trying to sustain that vision that he had for the garden, as well as interpret it in your own way. Mm-hmm. I recently have been charged with taking on a large property that was created in 1915. And there are vestiges of the very talented woman that created this garden that still exist. How do you marry the past with the future?
Yeah, it's a really important question. That I mean, it was easy for me because I gardened alongside Christo. That was one of the reasons it was easy. I knelt the ground beside him, and I think, say I didn't, and I took over that garden, then I'd be looking at his literature and trying to sort of capture that. But then when you look at his literature, you think, well, maybe I should copy that combination. And he once said to me, if somebody, he said, it'll be okay with you, but after you, it'll be difficult, because if somebody picks up one of my books and says, that's a Christopher Lloyd combination, so I've got to do that, they're doing the wrong thing for the garden. And that brings me to the next point. It was easy for Dixter because change was always in its blood. You know, it changed. He would have changed it. So you take that spirit, and so what was important for Christo? Good plants were important for Christo. Good performance were important for him. Combinations that made the hair stand up on your, that was important for him. That whimsy, that quirkiness, self-sowing was important to them. So you can take those sort of elements plus more, and take those into the future in the same way that he would have done. And also, he would always look at a piece of garden and say, if I can't really remember what happened there last year, then nothing happened there last year, then it's time to move that on. So you've got a difficult job, but so you've got to get into the mindset of the person that was the creative force behind that, but then you've got to bring your own creativity, because you're creative, into that, and try and make the best of it. The problem happens when you've got somewhere like Sissinghurst, where you're trying to stick to something, but actually that then creates a static garden. You know, Troy's doing a wonderful job there, and I think it's because he's sort of started to sort of lose those shackles a bit, and they're doing different things. And I remember saying to Troy, just garden it. You know, you understand that place, just garden it within its spirit, because every place will have its own spirit, and it's about understanding that spirit. Now, that doesn't mean we don't have historical gardens that are just to the point replicas, because you need that as well. But the whole strength, it's about understanding what the whole strength of Dixter wasn't just the infrastructure. It's about the infrastructure married with the creativity of the owners. So if you lose that creativity, you lose a big part of that garden. So it's just understanding what's behind it. It's not easy. It's not easy. And that's why we train all those people and give them everything, because You give them so much that because again, Christo said to me, you know, he said, I've given you everything because I know one day you'll be better than me. And then you try and do that to the next person, because then if I get hit by a bus, then the next person will come on and you know that will look after that garden, or look after another garden. Look at what Tom Cowards doing at Gravetie. He was one of ours. Matt Rees is doing it at Malverley's, you know. So it's about having these magic people out there that can feel the same space. All right. That hasn't pinned it down for you, but actually it's not easy. Yeah.
Okay, I'm coming.
Can you hear me?
Yes, of course, yes.
Thank you. Quick question. How much wildlife do you have that invades the territory? We here in the United States, in many sections of the United States, have such trouble with many different types of wildlife, things that are considered good wildlife and noxious critters.
Yeah. Yeah.
It doesn't look like you have any difficulty whatsoever.
Yeah. Well, I could have done a lecture on badger holes but I mean, of course we have damage, and it was really interesting. In 2006, we stopped using chemicals when Christo died, and we sort of didn't use much anyway, and so we stopped spraying, and suddenly the wildlife went mad, you know, with that. And then everybody sort of started questioning this, but it then balanced itself out. So now I can hand on heart say, in the last, I don't know, 12 years, something like that, we haven't thought once about using a spray, because we have problems with slugs, so we find different ways of dealing with them, which is sort of, so we got holes on our hostas, and we have problems with badgers digging up parts of the garden, but we just accept that we're a garden in the countryside, and we're actually in their space rather than the other way around, you know. And we've got, but we're only thinking that way because the damage is minimal, you know. If it was, and we have occasional deer damage, occasional squirrel damage, occasional pheasant damage, occasional pigeon damage. Okay, but occasional. So we try and protect the phloxes from the pigeons by putting cotton thread over the top of them. So we can sort of smile about wildlife because we don't have the problems, the issues that you would have, you know, in there. But I can honestly say that the first year when I stopped spraying, I thought this is going to be disastrous. The second year, I thought, well, we'll see what happens. Third year, I thought, oh, actually, I think it's going to get better. And fourth year, it did get better. So we went through that process. But, I mean, you've got mosquitoes, etc., all of that sort of stuff. So it's a different thing. But there's just such a beautiful balance at Dixter at the moment. And I don't know if that balance is going to remain. I think metre square, it's probably the third richest place in the UK from the places that have been surveyed. Metre square per metre square. So that's actually beautiful to be a part of that, you know.
Thank you.
Yeah, sorry, long answer to a short question, but...
Okay, we only have time for one more question.
Well, actually, it wasn't
oh, wait, there's one
all.
Back here. Do you need this?
Maybe I can yell.
Yeah.
Beautiful garden, beautiful presentation. I was just curious when you talked about like saving stuff. I mean, I'm curious to hear about, you know, if you're doing kind of seed collecting, kind of, you know, starting stuff, and then also just if you've seen any changes in plants just from propagating, if it starts to get different flowers. I'd be curious about that.
Yeah, okay, so we collect as much seed as we can ourselves. Okay, but then there are certain things that we want to grow that are F1 hybrids that we have to buy in. But I would say we collect 70% of our seeds. But you always want to, you know, bring new stuff in. I would say that we would, from the plants that we use in the garden, 98% of the new plants that the plants that we're using for those bedding displays are produced by us. But there's always a 2% where you may buy a new salvia or a new penstemon or something like that, just to get, and then you take lots of cuttings of that. So that sort of stuff happens all the time. And one of the projects that we have for a student, for instance, we have propagation projects for students where they look at stuff that we don't know how to propagate and then try and maximize numbers. But also we will give an aster to a student, a clump like that, and say, we want you to make 700 plants in a year. And once they get to 500, we show them how they can do it. Once they get to 550 or something, we stop them from doing it because we get. But so it's just this sort of. So we're constantly getting people to propagate, and if we can't fix, put roots on something, we try different dates, different conditions, different composts, variables of it. It makes it really, really quite interesting. So a lot of stuff produced by us. In terms of our own production of plants, do we see variability? Yes, in seed-grown stuff, very often you see that. They're not fixed. But from vegetatively propagated stuff, not necessarily. Not really. But we're seeing a real shift in what's being produced by breeders. They're dwarf little things. I was at the, yesterday morning, I was at the tulip trials at Wisley, and there was a tulip that was only about an inch tall that had been bred. I mean, that's how they grow in the wild sometimes, but I mean, how are you going to use that in a garden? But I quite liked it. But you see, there's breeding's gone down this, I suppose you can get, rather than get 15 plants in a flowering plants in a Dutch trolley, you can get 2,000 by having them dwarf like that. But, so breeding has gone in interesting directions. There are really good people out there doing really interesting stuff. And some new plants are brilliant, some new plants aren't, and there's always this sort of movement forward. And I think that's healthy, that sort of nursery plant breeding world. What isn't healthy in the UK is producing gardeners. Not enough place is putting energy into producing really high-level gardeners, And also, and these places can't be just for the elite gardeners. We have kids that are neurodiverse or whatever, we have a whole range of kids there, people who've been on the streets and so on. And I think that's really also quite important because it's about that community that you build within a space like that. It's not just those kids that have come out of Kew and Wisley and all those sort of things. It's about having, a diverse team that works effectively together because a different energy and a better energy comes out of that.
Thank you so much, Fergus. It's been incredible. So I'm sorry we can't do more questions now, but we can all adjourn and have wonderful food and more PIMS cups and celebrate. Another special thank you to the McIntyre family. Yes. So grateful you're all here and so wonderful. Come celebrate.